More shocking details are revealed in the death of a one-year-old.
A one-year-old boy died from
And of his body was covered in bruises.
Police say they fatally abused their toddler.
Today, we're traveling to Clovis, New Mexico, a medium-sized city, just a stone's throw from the Texas border. It's a place like any other, filled with families, homes, and the everyday rhythms of life. But in November of 2024, the ordinary was shattered by a tragedy that would leave a community reeling and investigators facing a heart-wrenching puzzle. This is the story of Calian Skywater, a little boy who had just celebrated his first birthday, a life that had barely begun before it was brutally cut short. It's a story about the people tasked with protecting him, the system that returned him to danger, and the horrific truth hidden behind a family's closed doors. Our story begins on a day that should have been like any other, Friday, November 27th, 2024. In Clovis, New Mexico, a one-year-old boy named Calian Skywater was rushed to the Plains Regional Medical Center. The details of what led to that hospital visit are murky, but the outcome was tragically clear. Little Calian was pronounced deceased. When officers and detectives from the Clovis Police Department arrived at the hospital, they were immediately confronted with a deeply disturbing scene. Looking at the tiny, lifeless body of Calian, they noted extensive and severe bruising. The injuries weren't minor or isolated. They covered his head, his face, and his arms. For seasoned investigators accustomed to difficult scenes, this was an immediate and glaring red flag. A child so young shouldn't have injuries like this. They needed answers, and they turned to the person who should have been Calian's fiercest protector, his 22-year-old mother, Donna Phillips. When questioned about the shocking state of her son's body, Donna offered an explanation. She told detectives that Calian's injuries were the result of two unfortunate, but seemingly accidental, events. First, she claimed he had been engaging in rough play with a sibling. Second, she stated that he had suffered a fall from a high chair. This wasn't the only story she would tell. According to an earlier police press release, December 2024, Donna had given a slightly different account to the first responding officers. She had focused on the bruising to his forehead and face, explaining that Calian had fallen 3 days prior to his death, causing those specific injuries. In that version of the story, she even claimed that Calian had been seen by his pediatric physician for the injuries from that fall. Two stories, both pointing to accidents and innocent childhood mishaps. But for the detectives looking at the extensive bruises on this baby boy, these explanations didn't seem to add up. The severity of the injuries just didn't align with a simple fall or roughhousing with another child. The case was quickly escalated, and the 9th Judicial Major Crimes Unit was assigned to dig deeper into the devastating death of this 12-month-old boy. As the investigation began to unfold, a crucial and deeply unsettling piece of Calian's history came to light, painting a much darker picture of his short life. Investigators learned that the New Mexico Children, Youth and Families Division, or CYFD, had been involved with the Skywater family from the very beginning. In fact, CYFD had seized Calian and his siblings right at the time of his birth, in November 2023. The children were placed into foster care, away from their parents, Donna Phillips and 33-year-old Onesimus Skywater. For almost a year, Calian and his siblings lived in foster care, presumably in a safe and stable environment. But then, in October 2024, a fateful decision was made. CYFD returned the children to Donna Phillips. Think about that timing. He was returned to his mother's care in October, and just weeks later, in November, he was dead. The very system designed to protect him had placed him back into the home where his life would end. This information raised horrifying questions about what had really been happening in that home during those few precious weeks. To find more definitive answers, Calian's body was taken to the Office of the Medical Investigator, or OMI, for an autopsy. The initial findings from the pathologist were stomach-churning and confirmed the investigators' worst fears. The pathologist relayed to police that Calian had bruising to an astonishing 70 to 80% of his tiny body. Beyond the widespread bruising, they also noted specific additional trauma to the child's head. This was not the result of a simple fall. This was something far more violent, far more sinister. Armed with this preliminary medical evidence and the troubling backstory from CYFD, investigators focused their attention squarely on Calian's parents, Donna Phillips and Onesimus Skywater. They conducted formal interviews with both parents and executed search warrants at their residence, searching for any evidence that could explain what happened to their son. But a full, detailed picture would take time, the wheels of justice. Especially in complex medical cases like this, often turn slowly. The community, and likely the detectives working the case, had to wait for months for the final word from the medical examiner. Finally, in April of 2025, investigators received the OMI's final autopsy report. The report confirmed what the initial examination had suggested. Calian had suffered major blunt trauma to his head, along with other significant physical injuries. However, the report also came with a frustrating and inconclusive official ruling. The New Mexico OMI logged Calian's death as undetermined. For the investigation, this was a major hurdle. An undetermined cause of death can make it incredibly difficult to prove criminal wrongdoing. It suggests that while the injuries are noted, the medical examiner couldn't definitively say, based on their evidence alone, that the death was a homicide. It could still theoretically be attributed to an accident, however unlikely that seemed. But the Clovis Police Department detectives and the 9th Judicial District Attorney's Office were not willing to let it go. They knew what they had seen. They had the pathologist's report detailing the blunt force trauma and the near-total body bruising. They had the mother's conflicting and unconvincing stories. And they had the chilling context of a child who died just weeks after being returned from foster care. They were convinced this was no accident. So, they took a crucial next step. They sought out a second opinion from an expert, a doctor who specialized in the heartbreaking field of child abuse pediatrics. All of the information related to Calian's case, the autopsy reports, the police interviews, the photographs, every piece of evidence they had gathered was forwarded to this specialist for a comprehensive review. Once again, they had to wait. The summer of 2025 passed. Then, on September 8th, 2025, nearly 10 months after Calian's death, the results of the doctor's review finally came in. This report would be the key that unlocked the case. The specialist's conclusion was unequivocal and damning. The report stated that Calian Skywater's body showed multiple injuries that did not correspond with the statements provided by his parents. The idea that this was caused by rough play or falling from a high chair was, in this expert's medical opinion, impossible. The doctor then delivered the final, devastating verdict in language that left no room for doubt. Fatal physical abuse. Not an accident, not a fall, not rough play. It was murder. This expert review was the final piece of the puzzle investigators needed. Just 2 days later, on September 10th, 2025, the Clovis Police Department announced that arrest warrants had been issued for both Onesimus Skywater and Donna Phillips, with assistance from the United States Marshal Service, both parents were taken into custody. Onesimus Skywater, age 33, and Donna Phillips, age 22, were arrested and charged with the most serious of crimes: intentional abuse of a child resulting in the child's death, a first-degree felony. They were booked into the Curry County Adult Detention Center, where jail records show they are currently being detained without bond. A long investigation was over, and the path to justice for Calian could finally begin. While his parents await their day in court, Calian's surviving siblings are once again in the custody of the state, placed with a foster family somewhere in New Mexico. We can only hope that this time they will be safe and that they can one day heal from the unimaginable trauma of losing their baby brother. When we look back at this case, the horror is layered. There is the immediate, visceral horror of what was done to a helpless one-year-old boy. The autopsy findings are almost too painful to comprehend. Bruising on 70 to 80% of his body. Major blunt force trauma to his head. This speaks to a level of violence that is monstrous, especially when inflicted on a child by those who are supposed to love and protect him. But there is another layer to this tragedy, one that implicates the system itself. Calian and his siblings were removed from their parents' care at his birth for a reason. The state of New Mexico identified a threat serious enough to warrant placing them in foster care. For nearly a year, they were safe. The decision to return them in October 2024, a decision that proved fatal for Calian just weeks later, raises profound and disturbing questions. And what about the parents? Donna Phillips, a young mother at 22, and Onesimus Skywater, 33. Their alleged actions defy comprehension. Donna's shifting explanations to police. First a fall 3 days prior that was seen by a doctor. Then a combination of rough play and a fall from a high chair. Smack of panicked deception. It's a classic pattern seen in abuse cases. The story changes as the abuser tries to find a plausible explanation for implausible injuries. The expert pediatrician saw right through it, stating clearly that the physical evidence on Calian's body simply did not match the stories being told. This case reminds us of the critical importance of mandatory reporting and of listening to our instincts. The bruises on Calian's body were described as extensive by the very first officers on the scene. The death of a child is always a profound tragedy. But when that death is the result of abuse at the hands of the very people who should have been a source of unconditional love and safety, it becomes a stain on our shared humanity. Calian Skywater was denied the chance to grow up, to learn to walk and talk, to go to school, to make friends, to live his life. His story is now a cautionary tale, a permanent record of a life lost to violence and a system's potential failure. As Donna Phillips and Onesimus Skywater face the legal consequences of their alleged actions, we are left to mourn a little boy we never knew, and to hope that lessons can be learned from his death, so that no other child has to suffer the same fate. If you found this story important, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of cases that matter. Your support helps bring awareness to stories like Calian's, and it ensures these tragedies are never forgotten.